Chapter 44. Nangong Kaishu was slightly surprised. She looked in shock at Ding Ning and asked, "Why did you suddenly think of asking about our Green Vine Sword Academy's Sword Trial Festival?" Ding Ning asked in response, "You should know of White Goat Cave's spirit vein?" Nangong Kaishu nodded in even more puzzlement. Ding Ning said, "Yesterday, the cave master allowed me to use the spirit vein to cultivate, but after one night, the situation changed. The principal of Green Vine Sword Academy, Di Qingmei, allowed our White Goat Cave disciples to participate in your Sword Trial Festival. The 3 victors of the Sword Trial Festival will receive the reward of using the spirit vein to cultivate." Nangong Tsaishu's expression suddenly grew ugly. She was a young girl with a strong sense of justice. So while she was a student of Green Vine Sword Academy, she had always felt some sympathy for White Goat Cave's situation. In her view, it was nothing to be able to enter White Goat Cave's library cave to study. In the future, White Goat Cave's disciples would definitely be able to enter the Green Vine Sword Academy's library hall to study. But Green Vine Sword Academy's most valuable possession was the White Goat Cave's spirit vein. Now, Green Vine Sword Academy wanted to give out White Goat Cave's spirit vein as a reward, but the Academy would not give out their most valuable Green Vine wooden sword as a reward. The reward for the Green Vine Sword Academy's Sword Trial Festival was green suet jade. This item was valuable, but it was not on the same level as White Goat Cave's spirit vein. This was full of the meaning of seizing by force. The Sword Trial Festival was originally our Green Vine Sword Academy. She bowed her head with an ugly expression. She had started to explain what the Sword Trial Festival was, but at this time, she suddenly understood some of the meaning in Ding Ning's words. She immediately raised her head and looked in shock at Ding Ning. "You want to participate in the Sword Trial Festival and win?" Ding Ning looked at her shocked eyes and said calmly, "I have this idea. From your expression, this Sword Trial Festival seems very difficult." Very difficult. Because she was sure that Ding Ning was a monstrous genius, Nangong Tsaishu's shock started to disappear. She frowned and thought about this possibility as she explained softly, "Because our Green Vine Sword Academy's original reward is green suet jade." Ding Ning was stunned. "Green suet jade?" Nangong Kaishu nodded and said, "I don't know if you have heard, but green suet jade is the amber formed from the juice of the green suet vine, unique to our Green Vine Sword Academy. When our Green Vine Sword Academy was founded, we discovered some of this amber. At the same time, we discovered the unique uses of this amber. This amber is very useful for us cultivators when we break through from the 3rd realm of true energy realm to the 4th realm of energy fusion realm." What he needed to do was to follow the flow of the 5 chi in the Severing 3 Corpses Selfless Self Origin Sutra, and slowly let the 5 chi that had been transformed by this cultivation method slowly seep into a sea of chi and jade palace, allowing his sea of chi and jade palace to undergo a certain degree of transformation. But if it was too fast, it would be too shocking. So when he talked to Nangong Kaishu, he decided to use a month to go from Realm 1 to Realm 2. He took a deep breath. Changes suddenly occurred in his originally calm body. It was as if countless tiny silkworms had suddenly appeared in his body and began to gulp down the spiritual energy that had seeped into his body. In just an instant, his body seemed to have turned into extremely dry land. He carefully controlled it. He did not allow his body to give off the sounds of thousands of silkworms chewing. Under his control, a small portion of the spirit energy was not swallowed by the silkworms and slowly merged into his 5 energies. Li Daoji's figure appeared at the door of this grass hut. He stood coldly and let his perception pass through the thin door to land around Ding Ning. Ding Ning had intentionally slowed down his cultivation advancement. Even so, when his energies sank into his energy sea, The vibrations that occasionally came out caused Li Daoji's brows to tremble slightly. Thinking of the sword essence that the laughable branch had shown, his eyes flashed with even more unusual light. He turned and walked towards the gates of White Goat Cave. There was a carriage waiting outside the gates of White Goat Cave, a carriage that could run very fast. Li Daoji's sword was very long. When he entered the carriage, he held the sword in his hand and then held it horizontally in front of him. The sword hilt gave off a faint red light in front of him. He leaned against the cushions of the carriage, his eyes closed as though he was asleep. The carriage sped on the road towards a place Ding Ning was very familiar with, the fish market to the east of the city. The carriage finally stopped at an entrance to the fish market. Li Daoji silently got off the carriage and slowly walked into the fish market. While the weather was good, under the cover of the layers of roofs, most of the places in the fish market were still dark and damp. The lanterns burned like willow wisps. Li Daoji was unfamiliar with the roads of the fish market. After walking slowly for an hour in the dark and damp streets, and even asking multiple shopkeepers, he finally reached the bottom of the fish market. He walked into a stilted building without any sign or lights. Li Daoji's eyes had completely adjusted to the darkness. When he walked into the building and saw the man with loose hair sitting on the couch, he knew he had not found the wrong place, and this person was living well in the fish market. "I want to buy a sword." Li Daoji looked at the man's shining eyes in the darkness and said, "I remember you have a remnant sword here." The man with loose hair looked coldly at Li Daoji and said coldly, "You are very lucky this sword is still here." After saying this, the man's body slowly moved backwards. The lower half of the man's body was covered by a blanket. Only now would people who entered the building see that he had no feet. His legs were cut off at the knees. But Li Daoji seemed to know. His gaze did not linger on the man's feet, but below the blanket that had been moved away. Under the blanket was a large black metal sword case. The man with loose hair opened the sword case and flipped through it. He took out an inky green broken sword and threw it at Li Daoji. Li Daoji reached out and firmly caught the broken sword. This was a true broken sword that was 2 feet long, and the blade was only 2 fingers wide. The tip of the sword had been completely cut off by a terrifying force, and even the remaining 2 feet of the sword was covered with dozens of thin cracks. However, the material of this sword was a bit special. Although the dark green blade was also made of some kind of metal, it had natural threads like some crystals and wood. Therefore, none of the cracks were horizontal. They extended along the blade towards the hilt. Li Daoji nodded. He saw the cloth strips used to tie things on the table in front of the man with loose hair. He casually pulled off several strips, wrapped the sword, and tied it to his back. Then he took out a money pouch and threw it to the man. The man closed the sword box and looked at Li Daoji, who had turned to leave. A strange cold smile appeared on his face. "Your luck is good. No one has ever taken a liking to this remnant sword. But I do not understand what made you remember this sword that is of no use to you. Is it worth it to lose your life for a broken sword like this?" Li Daoji did not speak. He silently walked out of the house and towards his carriage. A man in a crimson cotton robe had appeared behind him out of nowhere. This man looked about the same age as Li Daoji. There was a long and narrow sword mark on the left side of his face. Behind him was an exceptionally thick sword. The black scabbard was 3 times the width of an ordinary sword. The simple bronze sword hilt was at least 3 times larger than an ordinary sword hilt. This man had been following Li Daoji and maintained a distance of dozens of feet from him. Li Daoji could not have not discovered him following at such a distance. Yet neither Li Daoji nor this man made any special expressions. Only when Li Daoji walked out of Fish Market did the two stop in unison. I told you long ago, if you dare to leave White Goat Cave, I will kill you. The man in deep red robes said coldly as he stood at the entrance to Fish Market and looked at Li Daoji, who was slowly turning around by the carriage. Li Daoji glanced at this man and still did not speak. Chapter 46. Seeing Li Daoji's long sword about to hit the silver flying sword, a hint of viciousness flashed across the red-robed man's face. He flicked the fingers of his left hand, and the tail of the silver flying sword that had been vibrating in the air started to vibrate even more violently. With a few sizzling sounds, several balls of air were instantly compressed into sparkling water by the violently vibrating sword body. The silver flying sword seemed to be about to break. At an inconceivable speed, it suddenly flew down and cut towards Li Daoji's neck. A muffled sound came from Li Daoji's body. A burst of power collided between his fingers and the sword hilt. The sword hilt in his hand shone with red light. The pure black blade stood perfectly straight in an instant, yet in the next moment, this sword that was almost as long as he was bent strangely to the side under the impact of the power. The pure black sword brought out a blurred flame and directly curved into a black crescent moon. A part of the curved sword accurately blocked the small silver sword that was flying down at an astonishing speed. The two swords fiercely collided, but there was no sharp metallic clang. Instead, it was like two torrents had met. With a boom, countless balls of air exploded. The red-robed man's expression turned cold. He shouted, the fingers of his left hand spread open, and forcibly controlled the silver flying sword that had already flown up more than 100 feet. At the same time, his back shook. That unusually wide and thick bronze sword shook out of its scabbard and landed in front of him. Right at this moment, his right hand reached out, grabbing the descending bronze greatsword's hilt. However, before this, a scarlet pill already flew out from his right sleeve, landing in his mouth. There was a loud boom. When this bean-sized scarlet pill entered his mouth, a terrifying rumbling sound came from his throat. It instantly turned into a scarlet stream of air and surged into his stomach. Time seemed to stop at this moment. Li Daoji's long sword was still like a black crescent moon. The blade had not bounced back, but the red-robed man's body was already moving forward. The ground under his feet had silently caved in. The reason it was silent was because even the sound had not spread yet. The bronze-colored sword was carried forward by the strong wind created by his body as he moved forward. The broad blade of the sword stuck close to his right palm as it slid forward rapidly. In each minuscule moment of contact with his right palm, large amounts of vital energy would flow from the red-robed man's palm into the large bronze sword. The body of the bronze sword lit up. A straight seal line seemed to be polished by his hand, shining from the tip of the sword to the hilt. The red-robed man's hand finally gripped the sword hilt. Boom. At this time, the explosion under his feet reached the ears of the people watching from afar. A fierce flame lit up on his thick sword. This flame was blue, like the pill fire in some pill furnaces. The red-robed man's face was scarlet red in the green flames, as if thick red mercury powder was about to seep out of his skin. The air in front of him was violently split apart by the giant sword in his hand and his body, forming two gusts of wild wind that expanded to both sides. He took a step in front of Li Daoji. The enormous sword in his hand did not look like a sword at all, but an enormous steel rod as it smashed down. The blue flame grew again and formed a blue cauldron. Li Daoji's narrow eyes narrowed into slits under the blinding light of the blue flame. He knew he could not retreat. If he retreated, the oncoming giant sword would press forward again, and the green flames would burn even more fiercely. His left hand, which had been motionless by his side, landed on his red sword hilt. Balls of white primal energies of the universe flowed out of the black sword like an enormous white goat horn bursting out of his sword. Without any fancy moves, the long sword in his hand collided fiercely with the giant sword that was coming at him. The red-robed man gave a muffled grunt. His body fell back. But in this moment, the medicinal power that had spread through his body gave him great support. His body stood firmly at his spot, and the enormous sword in his hand continued to advance. Wild gusts of wind rose again. Li Daoji's carriage flipped to one side in the wild wind. One wheel hung in the air, and the other wheel in the axle gave off a hoarse and unpleasant sound of friction. Boom! Li Daoji's body seemed to have been hit by multiple chariots. He flew back dozens of feet and hit a locust tree behind him. His face was as pale as snow, but his lips were as red as blood. Blood spurted out of his back, and the bark of the locust tree he had crashed into exploded. Countless withered leaves instantly detached from the branches and fell to the ground. Dancing yellow leaves wrapped around a swordsman whose back was bloody. This beautiful scene was enough to make people think of the end. The red-robed man felt a thread of uncomfortable dryness. He knew this was the side effect of the pill medicine. Yet when he saw this scene, he still felt joy from the bottom of his heart. However, it was also at this moment that his breathing suddenly stopped. He sensed a presence of death coming from above. There were only dancing yellow leaves above him. Not right. His pupils contracted violently. In this moment, he finally saw clearly that behind a fluttering yellow leaf there was actually a small yellow sword close to it. This small sword was only the length of 2 yellow leaves. It spun and danced with the yellow leaves as though it was weightless. The red-robed man's heart was filled with great fear. His left hand trembled, and the small silver sword floating beside him rapidly flew towards the yellow flying sword under the direction of his telekinesis. Clink, 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 clink. Countless dense crashing sounds rang out above his head. All of the yellow leaves were crushed by the rampaging sword energy. Yet the red-robed man paled even more. He found he could not keep up with the speed of this small yellow sword. Li Daoji silently raised his head. His back was separated from the broken locust tree, and countless threads of blood appeared. The threads of blood did not break in the air, but he was already in front of the red-robed man. His long sword slashed in front of the red-robed man. The black sword curved and trembled in the air. In everyone's sight, it turned into dozens of black rings of light of different sizes. Dozens of black rings of light bloomed in front of the red-robed man. The red-robed man's face suddenly turned snowy white. The enormous sword he had just raised froze in the air. There was no meaning. He couldn't sense when the true sword shadows in the dozens of rings of light would descend. Moreover, with this momentary distraction, his small silver sword had already completely lost track of that withered, leaf-like small sword. Phew! There seemed to be a soft sound, but countless wounds appeared on the red-robed man's body at the same time. Thin arrows of blood sprayed out. There was a muffled sound. The red-robed man's large bronze sword fell hard to the ground. Then his body powerlessly fell to the ground in a pitiful manner. The silver flying sword seemed to draw a silver line in the air and landed in a courtyard of the fish market behind them. How is this possible? The red-robed man looked abnormally miserable. Even his hair was soaked in his own blood. His face was covered in countless blood droplets. His body felt abnormally cold due to the large amount of blood loss. He couldn't help but tremble. He looked in shock and bewilderment at Li Daoji, who was silently treating the wounds on his back. His pale lips moved slightly. "How can you win against me?" Li Daoji struggled to pull out the numerous wooden thorns that had been driven deep into his back. At the same time, he used his foot to pick up the remnant sword wrapped in cloth that had fallen under the locust tree. He did not look at the red-robed man, or the blood seeping out of his mouth. He slowly turned and walked towards the carriage at the side. "Why?" The red-robed man shouted uncontrollably. "Your flying sword and swordsmanship are above mine. Why did you not dare to leave White Goat Cave before? Why didn't you just kill me?" Hearing the man's dazed shout, Li Daoji slowly turned around. He used a voice only the two of them could hear and said coldly, "I did not leave White Goat Cave, not because I fear you, but because I do not have to prove anything. I did not kill you because there are not many Han left. Yu Daoan, my former senior sect brother." Yu Daoan thought that Li Daoji had taken a thief as his father and betrayed his sect. He said that Li Daoji would either die of old age in White Goat Cave, or if he left White Goat Cave, he would kill Li Daoji. The two should have fought before. While their vital energy and cultivation levels were similar, Li Daoji should have been much weaker than Yu Daoan in the past. Before fighting Yu Daoan, Li Daoji went to Fish Market and bought a sword from Sun Bing. Then he fought with Yu Daoan. After the battle, he returned to White Goat Cave. Then I noticed something else. White Goat Cave made an exception and took in a student. That student was the youth Ding Ning from the Falling Parasol wine shop. He reached profound understanding in half a day after joining the sect. Profound understanding in half a day? Li Lingjuan's expression had been unusually calm before this, but when he heard this, his brow suddenly furrowed. He unconsciously repeated the words, and his expression grew ugly. That day in Falling Parasol, he had discussed with this youth with great sincerity and made a promise. Everyone knew that he was a man of his words, but he had been humiliated. He disliked this young man very much. Later on, when he thought about it, he suddenly realized that before this young man had rejected him, he had already felt an inexplicable dislike for this young man when he first saw him. It seemed to be because of the youth's gaze that was calmer than his own. He seemed to feel that this youth would be a great threat to him in the future. This was a strange intuition that did not seem to have any logic. Yet in the past, it was not hard to find examples like this. Profound understanding in half a day. In my memories, in the decades since the Yuanwu Emperor ascended the throne, only 2 people in Changling were able to do this. He frowned deeply and looked up at Lu Sish. Since Li Daoji has endured for 10 years, then if there are no special accidents, he will continue to endure. So I think that Li Daoji's coming out of seclusion most likely has a great deal to do with this wine shop youth. Lu Sish nodded. He had the same thoughts as Li Lingjun. Just some old grudges and conflicts between sections. There is no need to worry, Li Lingjun thought, and said, "But I do not like this youth." Before this, Li Lingjun had expressed his dislike of Ding Ning. But because Ding Ning's status was so low, even if he expressed such intentions, Lu Sish and Chen Moli, his loyal retainers, would not do anything against Ding Ning. But it was different now. Ding Ning had entered White Goat Cave and reached profound understanding in half a day. Now that Li Lingjun said this, Lu Sish knew he had to take care of this youth. Changling is a place of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Li Lingjun was silent for a moment. As Lu Sish stood to leave, he said softly. In Lu Sish's ears, Lu Sish only thought that he was sighing at Ding Ning's profound understanding in half a day and Li Daoji's strength. But what Lu Sish did not expect was that Li Lingjun was still thinking of that wine shop in the alley and that stunning woman. He thought that if the young man was a little surprised, the beautiful woman in the wine shop might also change her mind. There were countless possibilities in life. If one did not easily give up, they might be able to turn one possibility into reality. Ding Ning was still cultivating. The energies in his body were immersed in his energy sea. at an unusually slow speed that was very fast for other cultivators. They moved towards the Jade Palace in the depths of his energy sea. At the same time, the countless invisible larvae in his body were also constantly devouring most of the spirit chi that seeped into his body, constantly causing subtle changes to his body. This was a profound and indescribable cultivation of two paths at the same time. Ding Ning sensed the cultivation of these two paths. A faint joy spread through his perception. Spirit veins were too rare, and he had not been in contact with spirit chi for too long. He had even forgotten the taste and effect of spirit chi. At this moment, as he felt those young silkworms devouring the spirit chi, he began to realize that although this spirit vein was small, it could at least double the speed of his cultivation. Based on this speed, in a month's time, when his cultivation of the Three Corpses Non-Self Origin Sutra broke through to the second realm, his true cultivation should also be able to break through from the second realm middle-class bone, washing to the second realm high-class marrow changing. Suddenly, the countless invisible young silkworms in his body disappeared without a trace. He stopped cultivating and opened his eyes with great vigilance. "Sect Uncle Li Daoji," he exclaimed softly, "since you have detected my arrival, come out." Li Daoji's cold voice sounded outside the grass hut. Ding Ning stood up from the meditation mat. The moment he pushed open the door and walked out of the grass hut, his brow furrowed slightly. He smelled the unusual stench of blood. Looking at Li Daoji's unusual posture, he asked in shock, "You are wounded?" Li Daoji's sharp eyebrows rose slightly. He did not say anything, and threw the remnant sword wrapped in cloth to Ding Ning. He said coldly, "Since you are studying the wildfire sword, then you need a sword." Ding Ning stilled. From the moment he caught the sword, he sensed that this was a remnant sword. He quickly untied the cloth. He found that there were many dry bloodstains on the cloth. When the inky green remnant sword appeared in his sight, his pupils imperceptibly contracted. His expression was still calm, but there was a complicated emotion that was colder than the autumn wind rising in his heart. He knew very well what kind of sword this was. He knew very well what kind of material this sword was made of and what it was used for. He even knew very well how this sword was made, because he recognized this sword. Or rather, this sword had an unusual relationship with him. Swords and cultivation methods are the same. The most important thing is suitability, but if you feel it is not suitable, you can leave it and not use it. Looking at Ding Ning's silence and unusual gaze, Li Daoji thought that he disliked the remnant sword. "Thank you." Ding Ning's hand landed on the hilt of the sword. He looked at the cracks on the inky green remnant sword and softly expressed his thanks. His voice was a little low, but it was sincere from the bottom of his heart. Li Daoji did not speak and turned to leave. "Did you get wounded because of this sword?" Ding Ning looked at his back and suddenly asked. Li Daoji turned slightly and said coldly, "You are too curious and too smart. You should know that people who are too smart and curious do not live long." Ding Ning looked calmly at the sword in his hand and said softly without looking up, "If I am not smart and curious, I will not live long." Li Daoji's body froze. Ding Ning smiled coldly. His finger brushed across the surface of the remnant sword. Threads of light flashed through the cracks on the blade of the remnant sword. It was as though countless tiny dark green flowers were about to bloom on the sword. Then she added, "Because I am only using it for a transaction and not for my own use, as long as it has the effect of increasing my cultivation, it does not matter even if it has negative effects on my body." After writing this letter and carefully sealing it, she couldn't help but glance in the direction of White Goat Cave before she started to comprehend the difference between vital energy realm and energy refinement realm. She murmured to herself, "So many days have passed, I wonder how your cultivation has progressed. The sword trial festival is getting closer. For this straightforward and chivalrous young woman, if the pill medicine she asked for was only to be used for a transaction, then what she hoped to trade for was Ding Ning's friendship. Nangong Saishu's letters started to be passed along the road. Another night, Ding Ning walked out of the gates of White Goat Cave. Just like usual, he entered the carriage waiting at the gates. In the dark and bumpy carriage, Ding Ning's hand once again touched the inky green remnant sword that usually hung from his waist and now lay across his knees. Even though more than half a month had passed since Li Daoji had brought this sword to him, and there were only a few days left until the Green Vine Sword Academy's Sword Trial Festival, every time he saw this inky green remnant sword, he would have a different feeling. This sword was called Last Flower. In reality, this sword's original name was Jasmine Flower. This was a sword from the Bazin Kendo ground. When vital energy flowed into the sword would shine like countless jasmine flowers. This had originally been a beautiful and charming sword. However, when the previous owner of this sword used this sword, every time he attacked, it was filled with absolute fierceness that left no room for maneuver. Every strike was like the last strike he could make. Every strike was like the end of his life. Every strike was like a flower that could not see the next day. Swords in the hands of different owners would become different swords and have different fates. It was precisely because this sword's owner's personality was straightforward and unreasonable, without any leeway, that this sword would eventually become such a broken sword. The appearance of such a sword reminded Ding Ning of the many debts he owed and had to collect. The carriage passed through the night, entering the walled Chongling and the flat streets. However, compared to the mountain path, the straight streets and alleys were even more bumpy. After some strange sounds came from under the carriage, and the carriage swayed strangely, the carriage slowly stopped. The middle-aged man driving the carriage explained apologetically to Ding Ning in the carriage, "Maybe the axle was not repaired well last time, and we were in a hurry, so some problems occurred." Ding Ning asked a few questions about how he could find a place to repair the carriage so late at night, and if there would be problems with the carriage tomorrow morning. Seeing that they were not far from Falling Parasol, he declined the suggestion of the White Goat Cave worker to rent a carriage to send him to Falling Parasol. He told the worker to repair the carriage and then walked towards Falling Parasol. Some of the streets outside Falling Parasol were ordinary residences. These residents who had worked for a day were sleeping soundly. Occasionally, the weak light of the lanterns swayed in the bleak autumn wind. Ding Ning was very familiar with such a situation. No matter how bleak the autumn wind was, it could not arouse his emotions. Yet when he walked through a dark alley, his brow suddenly furrowed deeply. He looked up at the roof to the left. His strong intuition that ordinary cultivators did not have caused his mind to focus. Just as he raised his head, several soft noises suddenly rang out in the deathly silent street. More than a dozen crossbow bolts whose tips had been purposefully sharpened to reduce the sound of the air tearing fell from the roof with murderous intent. Ding Ning's expression turned cold. His body quickly lowered, and he nimbly dodged under the eaves to the side. He easily dodged this round of arrows. Ding, 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 there was a burst of explosions. The crossbow bolts that missed bounced on the ground like broken grass. A flurry of footsteps sounded. 10 or 20 figures flashed out from the alley behind him. There was a cold light on the backs of these figures, but in their hands there was a sharpened bamboo pole that was several feet long. At the same time, more than a dozen figures appeared in the alley in front of him. They also carried sharp weapons on their backs and held sharpened bamboo poles in their hands. Ding Ning's expression did not change, but he took a deep breath and gripped the inky green remnant sword in his right hand. He did not know the origins of these people, but these people were clearly experienced and would not show mercy. This place was a certain distance from falling parasol. Zhang Sun Qianxue could not quickly discover that he was fighting here and could not come in time. So this place was likely to be his end. He glanced at the last flower remnant sword in the darkness. Every crack was unusually straight towards the sword hilt, and started to run. His thin body immediately pressed against the eaves and turned into a rapidly flowing black wind. At the alley in front of him, the people at the front immediately saw his astounding speed and the reflection of the remnant sword in his hand. These people seemed to have not expected the target they were assassinating to possess such power. In a flash, their eyes showed fear, but in the next moment, they still moved forward and made space for the people behind them. Most of the dozen sharpened bamboo poles did not directly stab towards Ding Ning's body, but chaotically stabbed around Ding Ning's body. These crisscrossing bamboo poles were like the simplest seal formations in the world, and immediately divided the area around Ding Ning into countless small pieces. Yet, a small portion of these people felt their hands lighten. The bamboo poles in their hands were cut in half. Most of the bamboo poles were still crisscrossing, but there was a straight path in front of Ding Ning. His rapidly advancing body didn't stop at all. In the darkness, a man in his 30s with braided hair at the front suddenly gave a scream. Ding Ning's body charged into his arms like a leopard, and the inky green remnant sword in his hand immediately entered and exited his abdomen several times. Hot blood sprayed onto the ground, and a pale white sword light flashed. An assassin next to this man reacted. Ignoring the braided man who was about to die, he swept his sword forward. Yet with a soft hiss, a patch of wild grass seemed to form in front of him and formed a grassland. This man retreated in shock. The sword moves of this thin youth in front of him were extremely dense and complex. He felt that he could not stop the other's sword moves from spreading, even if the other only had a 2-foot-long remnant sword. At this time, he suddenly felt his wrist was very cold. At this time, he found that the soft hiss just now had come from his wrist. Then his eyes widened in fear. He saw his hand holding the sword separated from his wrist, spraying out a spray of blood. Ding Ning's eyes did not show any emotion. His body seemed to squeeze past the man with the broken wrist. The shadows of the inky green remnant sword in his hand spread through the grass and swept through the abdomens of the two assassins in front of him. Pew pew, 2 waves of blood sprayed in the bleak autumn wind. What sword move is this? Such a complex sword move. This youth uses it well. In an alley behind these terrified assassins, a masked man in black robes sat on the steps under the eaves. Looking at the blood and the inky green sword shadows in the air, he frowned slightly and gave a sincere sigh of admiration. That person had just swung a horse-slaying blade when the air and blood in his throat suddenly disappeared. This person could not breathe and fell forward before he could even scream. Since then, 6 people had fallen around him. However, this kind of fierce battle was a heavy burden on his current cultivation and body. His breath was already burning. In the night sky above him, more than a dozen streaks of light suddenly appeared. His feet suddenly stopped, and he exerted strength again. His thin and small body passed under the armpit of the person in front of him like lightning. The broken sword in his right hand swung over and cut open a huge wound on the side of the person's waist. In the darkness, this assassin gave a beastly howl. Because of this blow, his entire body paused. In this pause, more than a dozen streaks of light fell. With a series of pops, more than a dozen arrows pierced his body and brought out dozens of balls of blood. 7 people had fallen in a flash. Even the dozen assassins in the back of the alley paled and found it difficult to move their feet. And they say they are iron-blooded men used to big scenes. They are afraid of being killed like this. They are not even as good as ordinary Qin soldiers. Bandits are bandits, they are not presentable. The masked man with a Taoist bun said to himself as he stood up. The moment he stood up, Ding Ning felt something strange. In the darkness, the eyes of this masked man in black robes started to shine like gemstones, and even his skin started to shine like fireflies. Ding Ning's body became slightly stiff, and his heart started to beat violently. He knew that a truly terrifying enemy had finally appeared. The instant this masked black-clothed man began to move, all of the assassins who previously blocked this long alley with bamboo poles, apart from those who were lying on the ground and unable to crawl back up, all of them retreated one after another. The masked man in black robes passed over the retreating people and faced Ding Ning, who was panting. His disdainful gaze flashed across the corpses around Ding Ning. He said seriously, "Such vicious tactics. If I did not see it with my own eyes, I would not believe that this came from a cultivator who started cultivating less than a month ago." Ding Ning lowered the last flower sword in his right hand and let the blood drip down along the cracks. He adjusted his breathing and looked calmly at the masked man in black robes. He asked, "Who are you?" "You definitely want to know who wants to kill you, but it is a pity that I cannot tell you. If these people can kill you, then I can just sit there and watch and get the same price." The masked man smiled. "I am just a person responsible for killing you." Ding Ning did not say anything else because the masked man in black robes had started to walk again. Regardless of why the other was interested in speaking with him, the other clearly would not waste time. He took a deep breath and did not try to flee. Facing a cultivator in vital energy realm, fleeing would only cause him to die faster. The masked man's gaze was absolutely calm and murderous. A vicious and murderous energy emanated from his body. His footsteps were very stable, and they seemed to be at the same frequency. However, his figure was getting faster and faster. When he took the third step, his feet had completely left the ground, and his whole body was flying forward. The masked man's right hand moved slightly. A wave of primal energies of the universe surged out of his body, causing his sleeve to feel like it was about to explode. But in the next moment, there was no reflection of a weapon in his hand. His hands were empty. There was no sword at his waist or on his back. A thin piece of yellow paper floated out of his sleeve. Seeing such a light piece of yellow paper, Ding Ning's eyes suddenly narrowed. A wave of cold rose from the bottom of his heart. His feet moved, and he retreated as quickly as he could. At the same time, the remnant sword in his hand slapped forward rapidly to expel the air in front of him. Inky green sword shadows formed in front of him like rows of tree branches. The thin yellow paper that flew out from the black-clothed masked man's sleeve made a light sound in the air and scattered into countless tiny ashes. As the ashes spread outwards, the path of the true essence contained within them burned fiercely in an instant, forming a terrifying fireball with a diameter of 10 feet. Ding Ning closed his eyes. His left hand landed on his sword hilt and slapped forward with another sword shadow. There was a loud explosion. The dark and cold streets were filled with an endless sense of dryness. Countless drifting flames flew a few feet in the air, then mysteriously disappeared completely. Ding Ning's entire body flew backwards behind the bursting fireball. Countless black holes appeared on his white goat cave robes. Even his young face was scorched. The web between his thumb and index finger was torn. Blood flowed down the sword hilt. However, there was no fear on his face. Looking at Ding Ning, who still gripped his sword tightly, the masked man frowned slightly. The fact that this attack had not killed Ding Ning had exceeded his greatest expectations. At this time, he did not want any more accidents. He took a deep breath, and the vital energy in his body surged out again. A piece of yellow paper flew, out of his right sleeve again. This thin piece of yellow paper was not as weightless as the first piece of yellow paper, and did not disappear. Instead, this piece of yellow paper fell hard to the ground like a heavy gold brick. There was a muffled boom. The dozens of stones on the ground immediately cracked, and the earth exploded. Each piece of stone and earth was infused with primal energies of the universe, and became unusually heavy. They all jumped up and pressed down on Ding Ning. The heavy snowflakes were still suspended in the air, and the edges that were not sharp enough cut countless fine wounds on his face and hands. But his movements did not pause at all. Just as this masked and black-robed seal master floated a dozen feet away like a falling leaf, he was less than 10 feet away from this seal master. The masked seal master howled, and his body flashed towards the eaves on the side. At the same time, his mental power once again focused on the area between him and Ding Ning. He felt that he was losing control of this place. He did not care about the suicidal swordsman behind him. He only wanted to kill Ding Ning and leave. The pure white snowflakes shook again, and were about to turn into a terrifying snowstorm. In this moment, Ding Ning had already attacked. The shadow of the sword appeared in front of him. In the dark green flames, there seemed to be a white wildfire burning. He was still 10 feet away from the masked seal master, and the sword in his hand was only 2 feet long. With his present state, he could not touch the other. But in this moment, the masked seal master felt a sharp pain on his face, and he could not open his eyes. When the icy coldness seeped into his flesh, he immediately reacted. Ding Ning had used his sword to knock away many snowflakes that shot towards his face at an astounding speed. What was even more chilling and unbelievable was that in the moment he could not open his eyes, his mental power could not sense Ding Ning's existence. In his perception, there was only the swordsman charging madly from behind. All of Ding Ning's presence seemed to disappear into thin air. A scent of blood suddenly rose from under him. The seal master finally realized something. He forced his eyes open, and with a shout, the black dagger in his left hand sliced downwards. In his blurry vision, he saw the dark green remnant sword was slanting and stabbing into the inside of his right thigh. His black dagger once again gave off powerful sword energy. But it was too late. The coldness had reached deep into his bones. The dark green remnant sword quickly cut through several of his important blood vessels, and then quickly withdrew, bringing with it a fountain of blood. The seal master's eyes were shocked. The black dagger in his hand turned and sliced towards Ding Ning's head. There was a deafening boom. Ding Ning's body flew backwards again. The black-clothed symbol master's eyes widened in disbelief. He could not believe that Ding Ning was still alive. He could not believe that Ding Ning could block his counterattack in this situation. At this time, the sword light of the gray shadow behind him had once again landed behind him. Because of the natural difference in cultivation, the black-robed seal master's right sleeve fiercely swung backwards. A wave of vital energy, along with dozens of pieces of seal snow that had not yet formed, charged towards the gray shadow behind him like a great wave. Pew! Chapter 51. Jing Maozong shook his head. The people of the streets had more connections and spies than the cultivators of the court. They needed to remember the people who made a living in the streets. But he was certain he had never seen these people before, whether it was this cultivator who was skilled in using seals to fight like the Yen dynasty cultivators, or the assassins with bamboo poles. These people looked like assassins who worked purely for money and had been mobilized from far away. There were too many surprises and suspicions for him tonight. Who wanted to kill Ding Ning? And they had spent so much effort to mobilize assassins from far away. He was also surprised by Ding Ning's strength and knowledge. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, He would not have believed that Ding Ning possessed such swordsmanship. Also, the name he used in Chongling before was Zhou Sansheng that Wang Taishu had given him. When he had driven the carriage for Ding Ning knew his name. But just now he had seriously asked for his name and seemed to have sensed that he was from the Yuezhi. Had he been able to see the blade essence in his sword moves in the previous battle, or had he been able to deduce that he was from the Yuezhi from the slightly unique healing pill medicines he had? Ding Ning did not pay attention to Jing Maozong's emotions. He thought for a moment, took a deep breath, and stood up. He glanced at the corpse of the black-robed seal master and said softly to Jing Maozong, next to him, "These people, do not touch them. Before the Divinity Bureau or the other bureaus arrive, try to maintain everything here. Do not touch anything." Why? Jing Maozong looked even more bewildered at Ding Ning. He also stood up. "You are not even searching their bodies?" Ding Ning shook his head. "No need, even a minor person like me needs to be killed in such a manner. The mastermind is not an ordinary big fish. It is useless for us to investigate. Only the people of the court will find something useful. Tell Wang Taishu that if nothing else happens, it's best for Two-Floor Tower not to get involved in what happened here tonight." Ding Ning coughed softly and started to walk away. After taking a few steps forward, he could not help but turn his head slightly and add, "You'd better not let anyone find out that you're involved in this matter." Jing Maozong looked in shock at Ding Ning, who was calmly moving forward with difficulty. He remembered Ding Ning's words, but still could not understand. "Where are you going now?" he asked worriedly. Ding Ning gave an unusually simple answer. "Go home. Go home? Who knows where your home is? I told you long ago that you left too quickly. If Wang Taishu hadn't left a suicidal sabresman of the Yuezhi here, I would have had to collect your corpse. How many days have you been in White Goat Cave, and you've already caused such trouble?" When the blood on his body was dried by the cold autumn wind, and he gently pushed open the door to the wine shop, cold and furious voices came from inside. Ding Ning closed the door to the wine shop and looked at Zhang Sun Qianxue shrouded in frost in the darkness. He said tiredly, "Today's matter is very strange." Zhang Sun Qianxue said coldly, "I do not care if it is strange or not. I only care about the result. I only know that there are countless grievances in Chongling. Everyone has grievances, even that Yuezhi person. Right now, it sounds like the Yuezhi is a vassal country protected by the Qin dynasty, but who does not know that before the Yuanwu emperor ascended the throne, the Tiger Wolf army of the Qin dynasty killed 130,000 Yuezhi people in one battle? If you do not step into the world of cultivators, you may be far away from these people and their grievances. But if you come into contact with these people, you cannot escape from these grievances. The result is that I am still alive." Ding Ning sat down, ignoring Zhang Sun Qianxue's increasingly cold gaze. He said softly, as though he did not hear Zhang Sun Qianxue's next words, "That masked cultivator pretended to be an assassin who was paid to kill for others, but I am certain he is a cultivator in the military. While he used some of the seal methods of the Yan dynasty cultivators, I am certain he is most skilled in the sword." Zhang Sun Qianxue sank into silence. Most of the time, she only cared about cultivation and was used to listening to Ding Ning's narration of what happened outside. At the last moment of his life, he only thought of using the sword, and not seals. This exposed some of the things he wanted to hide. That person was very strong. He even had enough power to kill me and Jing Maozong. He was not someone who feared death, but he was not even willing to be wounded. Many times, he was in a hurry to leave. Especially after Jing Maozong appeared, what he wanted to do was not to kill me and Jing Maozong, but to kill me as quickly as possible, and then flee. If he had not placed so many restrictions on himself from the start, we would not have been able to kill him so easily. Those cultivators who kill for money are true fugitives. They would not be like this. They would not worry about being discovered because they usually do not see the light of day. His behavior could only be because he has a special identity, and his master also has a special identity. So even if he may have been transferred from another place, he and his master may be people in the Qin dynasty's military. If this matter is related to the previous backer of Jinlintang, and they used such a formation to deal with a weak cultivator like me who may affect two-level tower, then what I am worried about now is whether Wang Taishu will live to see the sun tomorrow. Since this is the case, why did you not warn that Yuezhi person before? Zhang Sun Qianxue said coldly. Ding Ning looked at her and said seriously, because if it was as I thought, it was too late to warn him. Zhang Sun Qianxue looked at him and did not say anything. She just reached out coldly. There were two soft pops. Her fingers retracted from Ding Ning's waist. Ding Ning's two broken ribs accurately returned to their original positions. Maybe next time, you will not be so lucky. She looked at the bit of blood coming out of Ding Ning's mouth, and then at the last flower remnant sword hanging from Ding Ning's waist, and sneered. Guan Chichi, Hifu Guo Yuhua, and that wine shop youth who entered profound understanding in half a day after joining White Goat Cave should be dead by now. In an ancient two-story building, a similarly masked and black-robed cultivator looked with a pitiful gaze at Wang Taishu sitting across from him. He said with slight disdain, "You should know you are not a match for me. So why did you not run when I walked into this building? Because this is two-level tower, my home. In my home, even the strongest cultivator cannot easily kill me." Wang Taishu, pale and weak, looked at the masked cultivator, who had killed more than a dozen guards and appeared in front of him. He said calmly, "I waited here for you to speak with you and see what kind of person you are." The masked man in black mocked, "Is this the kind of weird mentality where even if you're going to die, you still want to die with some understanding? The other gangs in Chongling cannot invite someone like you. Also, to kill so many of my brothers in one night and use such a method to get rid of two-level tower, you need more powerful cultivators. It's even more impossible for those gangs to have such ability." Wang Taishu looked into the cultivator's eyes. "So the information I received back then was correct. There should be an important person in the military behind Jinlintang." This cultivator's eyebrows rose slightly. He did not admit or deny. In his eyes, Wang Taishu was a dead man. Yet Wang Taishu looked at him and said softly in a very sincere tone, "But have you ever thought, what if you cannot kill me? What if you cannot kill me, and you killed so many of my brothers in one night? I will not cherish two-level tower and will fight you to the end at all costs. I will find out who you are." Wang Taishu's tone suddenly turned cold. He said slowly, "You will have brothers and family. I will not be merciful against them." The masked cultivator's expression suddenly changed. "So I will not let you live past tonight." He made such a sound. A fist-sized green copper ball flew out of his sleeve with a terrifying burst of vital energy. The moment it flew out, the surface of this seemingly ordinary green copper ball had already lit up with countless dazzling golden rune lines. In the next moment, all of the golden seal scripts split apart. All of the bronze pieces burned fiercely and turned golden. In this study, a golden fire lotus bloomed. There was a loud explosion. Countless burning metal lotus pieces surged towards Wang Taishu at an unimaginable speed. This is the face of two-level tower, the most important foundation. How can I let you easily kill me here? When the green copper ball flew out, Wang Taishu's expression also became strange, and he also let out a similar sound. The floor under his chair suddenly split apart. When the golden fire lotus bloomed, A thin, faint green sword light flowed out of the masked man's pants like a silent stream of water. It flew close to the ground towards Wang Taishu. This masked man knew that these people of the Jianghu all had methods to escape. He had planned for there to be a secret escape path under Wang Taishu. If Wang Taishu really fell, he would be cut in half by the flying sword he had prepared. However, in the next moment, he roared in shock and anger. The floor under Wang Taishu's feet split apart. There was no secret passage that led underground, as he had imagined, but an explosion. An explosion even stronger than the explosion of the green copper ball formed under Wang Taishu's feet. A stream of air like a volcanic eruption sent Wang Taishu flying through the roof. Amidst the furious roar of the masked man in black, countless golden flaming lotuses instantly tore apart the wall behind Wang Taishu's original position. At the same time, the power of the explosion caused the entire floor of the small building to collapse. His flying sword wavered in the explosion fragments and air currents, causing his mental power to suffer some damage. The masked man's body flew backwards. He raised his head and saw Wang Taishu's body was so tall that it exceeded the range of his mental power to control his flying sword. And just as he caught a glimpse, Wang Taishu opened his arms, and a pair of black wings seemed to grow out of his arms. It was a strange gliding robe hidden under the robe. Whoosh! In the next moment, there was a sharp sound of something breaking through the air. Wang Taishu's body was like a bat, quickly disappearing into the darkness of the night. The masked man was immediately soaked in cold sweat. After being sick for a long time, he naturally knew how to treat his wounds. He quickly took off his tattered outer robe and the strange back clothes with several tears. Naked in this cold autumn, he slowly used his vital energy to force out all of the metal fragments in his body. Only then did he take out 2 bottles of medicinal powder from his outer robe, applying it externally and ingesting it internally, quickly bandaging his wounds. The great pain and loss of blood from these wounds made his head dizzy, but he still realized that since he was facing a terrifying opponent of this level, then his other secret residences in Chongling were not safe and could not be used for concealment. He hesitated for a moment. Then he reached out with his hands that were no longer warm. Silently, he took a few pieces of clothing from the bamboo pole that was used to dry clothes and put them on. Under the cover of the night, he flipped over dozens of walls and finally entered a side room in the backyard of a restaurant. There was a slightly fat chef in this side room who was sleeping soundly. He clearly was not a cultivator. He only woke up when Wang Taishu walked in front of him and pushed his body several times. Yet the moment he saw Wang Taishu's pale face, this slightly fat chef seemed to welcome the most important mission of his life. A strange light flashed across his face. He bowed deeply to Wang Taishu with unusual respect and asked, "What do you need me to do?" Wang Taishu looked at him and said softly, "Help me gather some information. I must reach a truly safe place before dawn." Mo Qinggong was furious. No matter who it was, if they were called up after resting for less than an hour, they would be furious. Even more importantly, people like him did not have much time to rest each day. He rubbed his slightly pained head and casually threw a dossier that the young person in front of him carefully handed to him into the fire basin at the side. Do not spend effort investigating this person. Put all your effort into that cultivator who used seals and had his head cut off. Have the Divine Strategy team investigate as well. Investigate to the end. The handsome young person in front of him looked in shock at the tongues of fire licking up from the fire basin. He could not understand why the dossier he had worked so hard to create in the shortest amount of time had been casually burned. He also could not understand why the youth had stopped investigating. Official. He could not help but speak. Do not think that I am muddle-headed from lack of rest. But just as he spoke, Mo Qinggong interrupted him with a cold smile. I know what you want to ask. I did not have you investigate that wine shop youth, not because I have any special opinions, but because I have investigated him twice before. Regardless of whether he joined White Goat Cave or not, whether he reached profound understanding in half a day, there are no problems with his origins. Investigating, this is a waste of effort. However, this was done by Qin Huaishu before. You have just taken over his position, so it is understandable that you do not know. So this youth had entered the sights of the Divinity Bureau long ago, and from official Mo's tone, he seemed to be very familiar with this youth, and even had a deep understanding of him. This handsome young official from the Divinity Bureau had a slightly stiff expression. He hesitated, but still could not help but say softly, Sir is right. This subordinate will ask more people before doing things in the future, so that I will not waste my energy. But are we really going to have the Divinity Unit investigate? Hearing the young official's words, Mo Qinggong's eyes were inexplicably cold. He stared at the young official of the Divinity Bureau and said coldly, You hold an important position in the Qin dynasty, especially in the Divinity Bureau. You have to understand that taking care of your own people is always more important than dealing with outsiders. Looking at this young official who was even more nervous but still did not understand, he sneered and said, The Qin dynasty has reached this level. We do not fear a single cultivator or cultivation place. The Holy One and the two officials do not think that the cultivation records of a sect can have a fatal effect on the Qin dynasty. What they care about is our absolute loyalty and whether each official acts according to their orders. They do not wish to see the war horse pulling the chariot of the Qin dynasty not follow its own footsteps. They care more about using public resources for their own personal use. We, the Divinity Bureau, take care of the internal matters of the dynasty and the matters of our own people. Since you have reached this position in the Divinity Bureau, since you know that the Divine Strategy Team is doing all they can to investigate the matter of Cloud Water Palace, since you feel that what happened in Chongling tonight may be related to private use of public resources, and so urgently reported to me, then why do you not go one step further and think clearly about your responsibilities? The young official's cold sweat soaked his hair and dripped down his face. If you want to stay in Chongling for a long time, you have to stand on the Holy One's side. Murong Cheng's cultivation talent is much better than Qin Huaishu's. He is also more handsome than Qin Huaishu and pleasing to the eye, but his corpse may have rotted by now, while Qin Huaishu has been recommended to study at Lingshu Sword Gate. Mo Qinggong looked coldly at this young official who could not satisfy him. In the end, he said, Qin Huaishu's strength is that he can see clearly and understand his position. I will not say what I said tonight a second time. I only hope that you can see more clearly in the future. Official, thank you for the reminder. The young official bowed deeply and respectfully. Go. Chapter 53. Don't. Lu Sish looked up at Li Lingjun and said in a most sincere tone, Wait a little longer. Li Lingjun hesitated for a long time. He gathered his hair and nodded. He knew that Lu Sish was right. Even if that woman with unparalleled power would be interested in his thoughts or had been waiting for him to make some requests, he knew that the woman, who was usually revered by the people of Chongling and surrounded by all kinds of praise, had a cold and decisive side that ordinary people could not match. If he made too many concessions, then even if he could return to the capital of the Chu dynasty separated by mountains and rivers, even if he could sit on the most exquisite throne in the world, the Chu dynasty would not be the original Chu dynasty. But how long could he wait? He turned his head and looked at the black night outside the window. He felt that each night in Chongling was so long, but there was not enough time. As he turned his head, Lu Sish's heart beat rapidly, and his breathing unconsciously stopped. He saw that Li Lingjuan's hair was completely white, At the rooster's crow, a faint red light flashed on the platform in front of the small temple at the top of White Goat Cave. On the meditation mat in the small temple, Xue Wangshu slowly opened his eyes. He looked at Li Daoji, who was standing in the last darkness before dawn. He cleared his throat and asked softly, "Is that youth's recent cultivation smooth?" Li Daoji nodded coldly and said, "He is the cultivator who has the smoothest cultivation I have ever seen. A few days ago, his energy sank into the Jade Palace, and he reached Realm 1 second-class cultivation. His following cultivation was not troubled at all. The obstacles and barriers that cultivators encounter do not seem to exist in front of him." A hint of excitement appeared in Xue Wangshu's calm eyes. He looked at Li Daoji and asked seriously, "You feel that he can reach Realm 2 before the Sword Trial Festival? That will depend on the speed of his breakthrough. After all, breaking through a major realm is completely different from the usual obstacles in cultivation. If there aren't many obstacles in his breakthrough, then he should be a monster who can break through to the Qi refinement realm in just a month," Li Daoji said in detail, and then said in a slightly cold tone, "But just this night, he was almost killed." Xue Wangshu stilled. He had thought that Li Daoji had appeared in front of him so early to discuss Ding Ning's cultivation with him. Li Daoji looked coldly at Xue Wangshu. Before Xue Wangshu could speak, he continued, "I do not know who it was, but the leader was a vital energy realm cultivator with many seals. The Divinity Bureau is investigating this matter." Xue Wangshu frowned, but he still didn't say anything. Li Daoji looked at him and said, "Ding Ning broke 2 ribs and was slightly wounded, but he did not disappoint. He and an energy refinement realm gangster were able to kill that vital energy realm cultivator." Xue Wangshu's brows relaxed. His eyes filled with an unusual light. He praised softly, "This youth really brings honor to White Goat Cave." This time, it was Li Daoji's turn to frown. In his view, this was not something to be happy about, no matter how he looked at it. The unusual light in Xue Wangshu's eyes continued to grow. His wrinkled, old face started to shine with an unusual light. He thought for a moment, then stood up. "Stay here today. Don't go anywhere." He seemed to be in a good mood as he smiled at Li Daoji and said. Li Daoji's breathing stopped. He seemed to sense something. He looked up at Xue Wangshu and slowly said, "Since the Divinity Bureau has intervened, Ding Ning will naturally return safely to the mountain. You do not have to go out." "That is not the same." Xue Wangshu shook his head. His usually indifferent eyes were filled with a rare pride. This expression was similar to the one Du Qingjiao had when he left White Goat Cave. "In these years, there have been very few things in White Goat Cave that can make me happy and proud. I finally got a student in profound understanding in half a day, and may reach energy refinement in a month. Also, my senior sect brother left him for me. When he left, last night, he was almost killed. Of course, I know the Divinity Bureau will let him return safely to White Goat Cave. But I have not left White Goat Cave for a long time. If I don't go out, even if I am alive, other people will think I am dead. Do you know what kind of people are the most terrifying in the world? Not those who do not fear death, but those who will die quickly and do not have to worry about dying. I am too old, so old I will die. But in the end, I still have to remind people of this." Xue Wangshu's voice was still echoing in the small Taoist temple, but his figure had disappeared. He disappeared in front of Li Daoji into the white clouds above the temple. When the first ray of light shone into falling parasol, Ding Ning woke up as usual. He coughed softly. The pain of 2 broken ribs was nothing to him, but under the intense exertion, the soreness he had not felt for a long time made him feel uncomfortable. Zhang Sun Qianxue sat by the window as usual and combed her long hair. White Goat Cave's carriage is outside the door. She did not turn around and said coldly, "However, there is one more person in the carriage. The carriage driver did not detect it. This should be a Realm 5 cultivator, but wounded. It should be Wang Taishu." Ding Ning knew that her perception would not be a problem at this distance. His eyes were filled with joy. "Today is special. I will return to White Goat Cave early and cannot make porridge for you," he said apologetically to Zhang Sun Qianxue as he quickly washed up. Zhang Sun Qianxue was silent. She wanted to retort, but she faintly felt that her cultivation in these years in this shabby alley had exceeded her expectations. She had even gotten used to what Ding Ning did for her, just like now, when he told her that he couldn't cook porridge for her. For a few breaths of time, she wasn't thinking that it was okay to skip a meal. Instead, she was thinking about what she should go out and buy to eat if she didn't have any porridge to eat. Maybe buy a bowl of noodles like he usually ate. In front of the carriage parked outside the wine shop, a middle-aged carriage driver with an honest face waited anxiously. He knew what had happened last night, and knew that Ding Ning was seriously wounded. But based on his understanding of Ding Ning after taking him in daily trips for the last half of the month, he knew that even if Ding Ning could not return to White Goat Cave today, he would notify him. Seeing the door of the wine shop open and Ding Ning's inexplicably pale face, the carriage driver immediately showed joy on his face. At the same time, guilt appeared in his eyes. "How are your wounds? Are you returning to White Goat Cave today?" "I am. Even in healing, White Goat Cave is better than the doctors in the neighborhood. Yesterday I was negligent. Later, an official came to investigate my carriage. The axle had been cut by a sharp weapon after entering Chongling. Someone must have done something to the road. But you are a student of White Goat Cave, not to mention the teachers of White Goat Cave. Even the officials of the bureaus will treat you differently. I really did not think that someone would act against you. This was an accident. Also, you are not a cultivator. If you found out early, you may have lost your life." After conversing with the carriage driver, Ding Ning nimbly lifted a corner of the curtain when the carriage driver turned to rein in his horse and then flashed in. Looking at the figure curled up silently on the couch, Ding Ning first made a gesture for silence. Then he coughed softly and said to the carriage driver outside, "Today, I fear it will be more urgent than usual. If the carriage is still okay, please hurry." The carriage driver, who usually received favors from White Goat Cave, thought that Ding Ning was in a hurry to return to White Goat Cave to be healed. He said simply, "I have put more cushions and bedding inside. You have to be careful when the carriage is bumpy." After responding, the carriage driver cracked his whip, and the carriage started to gallop. Under the cover of the rapid hooves and rolling wheels, Ding Ning looked at Wang Taishu, who was curled up next to him with a pale face. Even his body seemed to have shrunk. He said softly, "So miserable. You have to hide in this White Goat Cave carriage?" Wang Taishu looked powerlessly at Ding Ning, who seemed to have detected him hiding in the carriage. He squeezed out a pale smile. "Very miserable." Chapter 54. It is the Chongling Gate Guards. It seems to be a routine inspection. If it is just a routine inspection, this carriage belongs to White Goat Cave. Since it is carrying me, it should be easy to pass. As long as it's not someone related to that noble in the army, even if they find out that I'm in your carriage, there won't be a problem. At most, they'll just know that I'm in this carriage. After all, I'm not a criminal to be arrested. But if it is someone related to that important person in the military, they may try to kill you directly. Then I can only do my best to steal a horse and flee. Ding Ning and Wang Taishu conversed softly. While this appeared to be a routine inspection by the Chongling guards, the inspection at this time should be related to the assassination last night. next to the dozen or so bronze chariots flashing with cold light. A soldier, also dressed in scale armor, stood silently. The only difference between him and the other soldiers was that he had a black, sheathless iron sword hanging from his waist. The runes on this iron sword that were as dense as flowers, as well as the faint layer of fluorescence on his face, naturally revealed his identity as a cultivator that was completely different from ordinary soldiers. He appeared to be paying attention to the surrounding people and carriages, but in reality, his gaze was constantly flitting across the distant road. When Ding Ning's carriage appeared in his sight, his eyes lit up slightly as the carriage came closer, and he saw the marks left behind by the carriage wheels on the ground and the jolts of the carriage. The light in his eyes grew brighter, like a strange fire was burning. Looking at the slowing carriage, he called over the two soldiers next to him and said a few words. The dozen or so carriages at the front were driven to the sides of the road to make a wide path for White Goat Cave's carriage. The middle-aged man driving the carriage was pleasantly surprised. He thought that these soldiers had seen the small white goat symbol on the carriage and were letting them pass. However, what he never expected was that when he brandished his whip before the carriage that was gradually slowing down could even speed up, the dozens of scaled armored soldiers already temporarily stopped their inspection of the other carriages and pedestrians, quickly surrounding them. "Your table manners are unsightly. It seems you may die here today." Seeing the actions of these soldiers through the cracks in the curtain, Wang Taishu sighed softly and said sincerely to Ding Ning, "If I attack later, do not follow. As long as these people show any signs of wanting to kill you in broad daylight, I will not stand with you." Ding Ning nodded and said sincerely, "I may not bury you, but I will think of a way to get revenge for you." Wang Taishu laughed. He tried his best to hold back his coughs. It was very difficult to laugh. "What are you doing?" The middle-aged man driving the carriage looked at the approaching military cultivator and said angrily, "This is a carriage of White Goat Cave." The military cultivator with the black sword at his waist was expressionless as he continued to walk forward. He said coldly, "The carriages of White Goat Cave will also be inspected." "That may not be the case." This simple carriage driver, who usually did not care for etiquette, sneered. He took out a document with a bright red seal from his sleeve. "This is an official document from the Divinity Bureau. To prevent accidents, there are no obstructions." In the carriage, Ding Ning and Wang Taishu stilled. The two of them had not expected such a change. The bureaus of the Qin dynasty all had special documents. These documents were used in emergency situations to coordinate the people of the bureaus. The document this carriage driver took out was a special document from the Divinity Bureau. Because the Divinity Bureau was in a rush to transport prisoners or witnesses, there was a special document that didn't require inspection at the checkpoints along the way. Based on this carriage driver's usual behavior, he definitely would not have thought of asking the Divinity Bureau for a document like this. The Divinity Bureau probably did not want anything to happen to Ding Ning after last night's incident, so the officials took special care of him. Yet, facing such a change, this military cultivator with the black sword at his waist was still cold and indifferent. "This document is invalid." "Why is it invalid?" The carriage driver opened his mouth in disbelief. But before he could speak, a cold voice sounded from the side of the road. A bald man who looked like an ordinary merchant raised his head slightly to look at this military cultivator, who was half a head taller than him. His expression was even colder than this military cultivator's. After speaking, his right hand reached forward from his waist, and a black jade token hung in his hand. The aura of this jade token was also very cold. The three words Divinity Bureau on it revealed the identity of this bald man disguised as an ordinary merchant. The Divinity Bureau was undoubtedly one of the most feared places in Chongling. So when this jade token was exposed to the morning sun, Even the unrelated passers-by felt a chill. But facing the threatening gaze of this Divinity Bureau official, the expression of this military cultivator with a black sword did not change. He said coldly, "Because I am Duan Jiqiu, commander of the Qi Gate Army, awarded the rank of Baihu." The plain-clothed official of the Divinity Bureau froze, his expression turning extremely ugly. The Qin dynasty's military titles were divided into 20 levels. Those above level 8 had many privileges and could enjoy the tax of 100 households. This was a reward that only level 9 officials could enjoy. Now, that White Goat Cave belongs to the Green Vine Sword Academy. I have nothing to worry about. Based on my contributions, even if I slowly whittle them down, I can do more of these things. Moreover, you guys are probably desperate enough to jump over the wall. Don't tell me you guys would do something so unsightly? Although his tone was as calm as Ding Ning's, as if there was no anger in it, his words were indescribably domineering. The pride in his eyes caused the corners of Duan Jiqiu's mouth to twitch uncontrollably. Duan Jiqiu's gaze flashed violently. Then he looked coldly at Shui Wangshu and said, "All right, then let's see what strength you have to say such words." Shui Wangshu still smiled without any anger. He even turned his body slightly. He did not look at this military cultivator who was giving off terrifying murderousness, but at the mountain further behind North General Mountain, where White Goat Cave was. In the morning light, the distant peaks behind Bei Jiang Mountain were like the faintest brush strokes in an ink painting. They were faintly beautiful, but also seemed unreal. "Watch me move that mountain over." At this moment, Shui Wangshu said something that many people couldn't understand. However, the moment he said these words, the faint mountain peak he was looking at suddenly became clear. Duan Jiqiu's face suddenly turned snowy white, and his body uncontrollably trembled. At this time, there was a muffled boom in the sky above. There seemed to be another mountain. Chapter 55. Many people present panicked and did not know what had happened. They did not understand why the faint mountain range in the distance had suddenly become clear, but both Duan Jiqiu and the bald Divinity Bureau official knew what had happened. This was the mountain-moving realm. Only when all the primal energies of the universe in the distance were sucked in and moved over would the faint mountain in the distance become clear. Only when such a terrifying amount of primal energies of the universe was sucked in would an invisible mountain suddenly appear above everyone's heads. Amidst the panic, Shui Wangshu grasped the small white jade sword at his side in satisfaction. The invisible mountain that was pressing down on everyone's heads suddenly disappeared. However, an even more majestic power was emitted from the small white jade sword that seemed to be a decoration. It was close to the ground as it curled upwards. Pew, 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 Duan Jiqiu gave a low shout. His metal clothing shook off the dust accumulated over the years. He could not suppress it and floated up until his feet were a foot off the ground. All the chariots parked at the side seemed to sense a fatal danger and gave off violent vibrations. All the Taotai seal scripts on the chariots lit up and gave off blinding light. Numerous greedy and bloodthirsty ferocious beasts with a fierce aura seemed to be about to rush out from the surface of the war chariot in the next moment and devour people. However, what was even more shocking was that these heavy formation chariots that required 4 war horses to pull were also lifted into the air by a surging force in the next moment. They flew higher and higher, and very quickly they far surpassed the height of the pavilion by the side of the road. This was an indescribable scene. The heavy seal chariots were thrown into the air. The vicious beasts on the chariots were powerless to resist. Even the armored soldiers were shocked, speechless. But seeing this scene, the Divinity Bureau official suddenly reacted and exclaimed, "Don't." It was not easy to create seal chariots. Each chariot was the work of countless craftsmen, and was a valuable treasure of the Qin dynasty. According to the laws of the Qin dynasty, if a cultivator deliberately damaged a seal chariot, they would be executed. However, his worries seemed to be unfounded. There was a soft sound. All the strangeness in the air suddenly disappeared. Pew-pew, Duan Jiqiu's body landed on the ground, and 2 more plumes of dust came out from under his feet. All the heavy seal chariots were pulled by a gentle power and silently landed on the ground. The beasts formed by the patterns of light on the surface of the seal chariots quickly disappeared in fear. Shui Wangshu put away the small, white jade sword that looked like a decoration and glanced proudly at the pale Duan Jiqiu. Gasps sounded. A cold youth dressed in a thin blue robe, his figure unusually well proportioned, and even his facial muscles did not seem to have any excess fat, was the exception among the students of Green Vine Sword School. He woke up at the rooster crows and first drank large amounts of warm spring water to wash his stomach. Then he counted the portions and ate simple grains and vegetables that had been boiled in the spring water. Then he started to forge the sword for 2 hours, read books for 2 hours, and then entered meditation to cultivate. This youth, about the same age as Nangong Kaishu, strictly followed his own cultivation plan. He was not affected by the news of the outside world and did not waste any time. His name was He Zhaoxi. His father had given him this name in hopes that he would not pay attention to meaningless matters and only seize the day. In Green Vine Sword Academy, Nangong Kaishu was an exception. She was not worried because of Shui Wangshu's display of strength. She was worried about Ding Ning's cultivation progress. There were only a few more days until the Sword Trial Festival. Could Ding Ning reach energy refinement realm, like he said? So she could not help but pick up her brush and anxiously write a letter to urge her father. The pill medicine matter I mentioned last time. What happened? In the grass hut of White Goat Cave, Ding Ning sat cross-legged on a meditation mat filled with spirit energy. Shui Wangshu was really willing to pay this time. The medicine he had given him was the rare dragon tiger great reversion pill. The thick medicinal energy was growing in his body. He did not even need to use the 9-death silkworm. When the Sword Trial Festival started, his wounds would mostly heal. Before closing his eyes, his gaze once again landed on the last flower remnant sword in front of his knees. Sometimes killing for revenge seemed very boring. Those who died could not come back to life, and maybe more people would die. Yet Wang Taishi was right. If one did not enjoy living, then there was no meaning in living. In his mind, Zhang Sun Qianshue's figure appeared again. He thought of the fairness she spoke of. The fairness in a person's heart was not the same as the so-called fairness of the world. This sword is in my hand now, but maybe it will become yours. Under a waterfall not far from Green Vine Sword Academy, Li Lingjuan's most important advisor, Lu Sish, looked calmly at a youth dressed in the uniform of Green Vine Sword Academy and said in a seductive tone. This youth was clearly a student who had enrolled several years earlier than Nangong Kaishu. He had a faint whisker around his lips, and his Adam's apple was obvious. His hands had calluses from rubbing against the hilt of his sword. This young man had a square face and looked rather calm. However, his eyes were filled with shock and unconcealable desire. He had been staring at Lu Sish's right hand the entire time. That was a small silver white sword. It was only a foot long, a foot shorter than Ding Ning's last flower remnant sword. Yet its short blade was covered in fine seal scripts. At this time, Lu Sish had not channeled any vital energy into the sword, but many of the seal scripts on the blade were shining on their own. They looked like dandelion seeds dancing in the air. This was the snow dandelion sword from the hands of the Chu dynasty's famed teacher, Ji Tianxue. The unique material and seal scripts not only allowed this sword to become a container for the mental power of cultivators, it could also be used as a flying sword by cultivators after Realm 5. The sword itself also contained unique power. There were very few forging materials in the world that had their own power. Only some forging sects of the Chu dynasty knew how to use such materials to forge all kinds of seal weapons and talismans. The Chu dynasty had dominated for hundreds of years. Its unique forging methods and all kinds of powerful seal weapons were its unique foundation. This snow dandelion sword was a famed sword even in the Chu dynasty. But no matter how stupid this Green Vine Sword Academy student was, he knew that he had to pay a great price to obtain a sword like this. So he took a deep breath and tried to appear calmer. He asked, "You represent Li Lingjun. Now you say that this sword may belong to me. What does Li Lingjun want me to do?" "Mo Chen, I have carefully investigated your background. While you come from the Mo family of an city, like the nobles of the Missouri estate, and your cultivation talent is not bad, your branch has been at odds with the nobles of the Missouri estate in your grandfather's generation. Now, their branch has been made marquises, but you are still in a city growing poorer by the day. Also, when you came to Chongling to study, you received special care. Some people who want to curry favor with the Missouri estate deliberately made things difficult for you. In the end, you finally managed to enter the Green Vine Sword Academy. If you do not have any fortuitous encounters, I fear that you will not stand out in the Green Vine Sword Academy and will not be successful." Lu Sish looked deeply at this Green Vine Sword Academy student called Mo Chen. "I have found you on behalf of Li Lingjun because I want this sword in exchange for your promise. Li Lingjun wants you to become his retainer in the future." Mo Chen said dazedly, "Just that." He was filled with disbelief. For him, even if there were no benefits, it was an honor to be a student of Li Lingjun after leaving the Green Vine Sword Academy. With this sword, you should be able to enter the top 3 of the Sword Trial Festival. Lu Sish looked at him and said softly, "Li Lingjun does not like that youth from White Goat Cave who reached profound understanding in half a day, so he hopes that you will not let him enter the top 3. Mo Chen's body shook, and he exclaimed, "He wants me to use this sword to participate in the Sword Trial Festival. Do you feel that this is unfair to others?" Lu Sish said with a cold smile, "According to my understanding, the Green Vine Sword Academy's Sword Trial Festival does not limit what kind of sword can be used. But other people cannot get such a good sword. You have the ability to possess such a sword. What is unfair about that? Also, how can there be fairness in this world?" Mo Chen's heart beat violently, and his lips trembled. He was very nervous, and his body uncontrollably heated up. He thought that with this sword, if he won the Sword Trial Festival, he could win the chance to cultivate with a spirit vein and obtain the green suet jade that would be beneficial to his future cultivation. With all of this, he would not be like he was now, unable to shine in the Green Vine Sword Academy. "Should I kill him in the Sword Trial Festival?" He looked up and asked Lu Sish, his forehead covered in sweat. "As long as there are other solutions, never think of using such a simple, crude, but dangerous and stupid method." Lu Sish shook his head. "To turn a genius into a mediocre person, as long as he does not have enough time to cultivate, as long as he is injured, as long as he does not have the conditions to increase his cultivation, as long as he is not a true monster that reaches vital energy realm in a few months, why should Li Lingjun look at him differently in the future?" Mo Chen feared that if he lost this opportunity, it would not come again. He nodded hard, cold sweat rolling down his back. He was shocked at the loftiness of these important people. At the same time, Lu Sish's words caused him to faintly feel, were the rumors true? That new disciple of White Goat Cave could reach Realm 2 in a month. Chapter 57. The yellow leaves had all fallen, and the blinding but not warm sunlight shone on the stone path of the inner palace of Chongling. A man in yellow official robes embroidered with serpents slowly walked through the stone path towards the study at the end of the path. This man appeared to be in his 30s. His skin was smooth and gave off a yellow jade-like glow. His forehead was wide, and his lips were thick. He looked exceptionally determined. His figure was very ordinary, but he gave off a strange feeling of power. As he walked slowly, he gave people the feeling that his arms and legs were as hard as iron. On the two sides of the stone path were many powerful copper puppets that could move at any time. In the study at the end was the Empress of the Qin dynasty, the woman with the most dazzling beauty and power. Anyone would be nervous and fearful when they were summoned by this woman. But this man did not seem to have such emotions. His gaze was fixed forward, and his steps were steady. The Empress was sitting on the phoenix chair in the study. The spring in front of her was still giving off milky white spirit energy, threads of spirit energy wrapped around the spirit lotuses that were almost as perfect as her. When this man slowly walked into her study, she slowly raised her head. In this kind of day, her beauty was even more dazzling and her gaze even more authoritative. The man dressed in yellow official robes with python embroidery walked until he was 20 steps away from her before stopping. Then he only bowed slightly in greeting. To be able to enter her study and stand 20 paces from her, this was an honor for all the officials of the Qin dynasty. This man had such an honor because he was one of the generals with the highest military power in the Qin dynasty. He was the general of the Dragon Tiger Northern Army, Liang Lian, who had completed his military service and was most likely to be made a marquis. I have already warned you. Even if you want to take that piece of meat from the marketplace, you cannot use such simple and crude methods. You must be more gentle and careful. Without wasting words, the Empress looked at Liang Lian and said, "You disappoint me greatly." Liang Lian said apologetically, "That was an accident." A hint of coldness appeared on the Empress' perfect face. "This was not an accident, but your choice. If you had not wanted to kill a wine shop youth who had some connection to Wang Taishu, you would not have disturbed Shui Wangshu. Even if that gangster was not killed immediately, he would not have survived. If Shui Wangshu and Du Qingjiao were so weak, they would have disappeared from Chongling long ago. Would White Goat Cave need to merge into the Green Vine Sword Academy?" The Empress looked at the silent Liang Lian and said with slight disdain, "It was you who wanted to get rid of the roots, so you failed in the end." Chapter 58. When Ku Shichuan spoke, the area in front of the Green Vine Sword Academy suddenly became silent. Nearby, Su Hashan and Xiet Changsheng stopped talking. Xiet Changsheng couldn't help but shake his head and say with slight disdain, "Even if he has such ambition, he does not need to say it so publicly to show his extraordinariness." Su Hashan was slightly convinced and said softly, "At least he has such ambition." Students from more than a dozen cultivation places had gathered here, but only 3 or 4 of them qualified to attend the Min Mountain Sword trials. Of the 3 or 4 cultivation places that qualified to attend, only Ku Shichuan dared to say so. The others knew they were not strong enough and could only be green leaves in the background at the trials. Ku Shichuan naturally could not guarantee that he would obtain a chance to enter Min Mountain Sword sect to study at the trials, but he could use this as a goal compared to the people around him who did not even associate him with the trials. His words had the meaning of, "You sparrows do not know the ambitions of the swan." Xie Changsheng, Su Hashan, and the others felt that Ku Shichuan had the right to be proud, so they only muttered in private and did not want to publicly refute Ku Shichuan. However, some of the students present were of great birth, but were not as strong as Ku Shichuan. After a short silence, someone could not help but say softly, Brother Gu's ambitions are great, and we cannot compare. But if Ding Ning of White Goat Cave is like an Baosher of Lingshu Sword Gate and Jing Liuli of Min Mountain Sword Sect, energy refinement in a month, and then his cultivation speed is similar to the two of them, maybe he will be a strong opponent by the time of the Min Mountain Sword trials. Really? Ku Shichuan looked at that person and smiled slightly. He said, then we have nothing to do, so let's make a bet. Let's see if Ding Ning can have a breakthrough today and reach energy refinement in a month. Hearing this, most of the people present felt that it was meaningless, because at least until yesterday, everyone was sure that Ding Ning had not broken through to the next realm. With today as the deadline, the probability of Ding Ning breaking through to the next realm was too slim. In reality, everyone present felt that it was impossible for the wine shop youth of White Goat Cave to reach energy refinement in a month. Energy refinement in a month was only possible because of the records of Min Mountain Sword Sect and Lingshu Sword Gate. Could it be that Ding Ning could really reach the qi refining stage within a month? If most people bet that it was impossible, then even if a minority bet that it was possible, most people wouldn't be able to bet even if they won. However, at this moment, a rather immature but rebellious voice rang out. All right, if that's the case, then I'll bet 3 mica knife coins that Ding Ning can successfully break through today. His gasps could be heard in front of Green Vine Sword Academy's mountain gate. Everyone's gaze gathered on that person. 1 mica knife coin was worth 500 gold. 3 was 1,500 gold. Most of the students present would not be able to gather so much money in a short time. The students even thought that the speaker was joking, but when they saw the speaker and the 3 knife coins he took out from his sleeve, everyone knew that this person was not joking. This person was Xie Changsheng of White Cloud Monastery. The Xie family was rich in Guangzhou. Other people could not afford to bet 1,500 gold, but he could. What are you doing? Su Hashan beside Xie Changsheng had an expression of disbelief. Money is just worldly possessions. Xie Changsheng twisted his mouth and answered softly. In reality, when Ku Shichuan was mocking him, he had been slightly displeased. When he saw Ku Shichuan proudly propose a bet, he could not control himself. Oh, Ku Shichuan saw that it was Xie Changsheng and frowned slightly. She wanted to speak. It seemed that as long as he spoke, the bet would naturally go through. However, at this moment, there was another sound of reining in the horse. Xie Changsheng, is the money of the family not money? You think that you can squander it as you wish when it is in your hands? Xie Changsheng, you think that because Father gave you such a name, you can really win and win every bet. Along with the clear sound of reining in the horse, angry female voices rang out one after another on the mountain path. Xie Changsheng shuddered, and his face paled. What is going on? Su Henian followed the crowd's gaze and saw a tall young woman with murderous eyes flash out of a stopped carriage. This young woman had a pretty oval face and a well-proportioned body. Her long hair was tied up with a jade hairpin, which made her neck appear even more slender. Who is she? Su Henian couldn't help but look at Xie Changsheng and ask. He knew that this young woman was a student of Tai Shaoli Palace from the 2 words Tai Shao embroidered on her green robes. Tai Shaoli Palace had been on the Green Vine Sword Academy's invitation list for the past few years, but the number of students from Tai Shaoli Palace had been relatively small, so he had never seen this young woman before. She is my older sister, Xie Ro. Her name is Gentle, but she is not gentle at all, Xie Changsheng said softly with a bitter expression. Su Hashan couldn't understand. Even if she was his older sister, he didn't have to be so scared. I can't beat her. Besides, we're studying outside. Father asked her to take care of the money. I want to take it from her. Xie Changsheng seemed to know what Su Heshan was thinking, so he added softly. Su Heshan's expression instantly relaxed. His heart was filled with sympathy for Xie Changsheng. After all, he was used to Xie Changsheng squandering money like it was dirt. At this time, in White Goat Cave, many students had surrounded Zhang Yi and were asking about Ding Ning's cultivation. Very difficult. Zhang Yi couldn't help but glance in the direction of the grass hut hidden in the gorge. He understood the emotions of these students. From their doubts about Ding Ning at the start, many White Goat Cave students now had high expectations of Ding Ning. But he still explained truthfully. He opened the Jade Palace in the middle of the month, based on the speed of the 5 energies. Unless his cultivation progress is extremely stable and there are not many obstacles in his breakthrough, like when he reached profound understanding in half a day, he may reach energy refinement realm today. Hearing Zhang Yi's explanation, the White Goat Cave students around him were slightly disappointed. In the quiet grass hut, Ding Ning was calmly cultivating. The Jade Palace, in the depths of his energy sea, had already been completely lit up by the 5-colored yuan qi. At this moment, the 5 energies flowing in his energy sea had already flowed upwards from the Jade Palace, forming a pillar of energy. In a slow and unusually steady manner, it was moving towards the top of his energy sea, towards the brightest space. That brightest space was the celestial aperture. At this time, the top of the energy pillar was only a sliver away from that bright space. Just as the White Goat Cave students around Zhang Yi dispersed in disappointment, this last sliver of distance slowly disappeared under the slow and steady movement of the energy pillar. Ding Ning's body shook slightly. Energy sea, Jade Palace, and celestial aperture were completely connected. The 5 energies flowed down from the celestial aperture like a waterfall, without any delay or hindrance, under the guidance of Ding Ning's psyche power. A part of the 5 qis that were circulating in the sky began to condense in a mysterious way. Some milky white physical energy that was many times heavier than the 5 energies in his body started to form and settle down. His energy sea started to change from being filled with the 5 energies to being filled with this kind of physical energy. This was energy refinement realm. At this time, many people were discussing his cultivation. Even eldest sect brother Zhang Yi, who had always favored him, did not have confidence in his breakthrough. The students at the gates of the Green Vine Sword Academy thought this was impossible, yet no one knew that for Ding Ning, this was an inevitable matter. This was just part of the plan. So this afternoon, while many people were still arguing about this matter, in this quiet grass hut, Ding Ning quietly had a breakthrough. Energy refinement in a month. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.